If you found me on TikTok, this episode is for you. I shared a piece of our story, and my DMs haven't stopped since. And it was perfect timing because we had just recorded on this topic. The part I haven't talked about: when I left, my husband didn't know if I was ever coming back, and he stayed anyway. So if you are the one right now who was waiting, praying, believing for a spouse who walked out, you need to hear what Jay shares in this episode, because he was that person, and he's going to tell you exactly what kept him standing. Let's get into it. Hello, my name is Sonia, and welcome back to the Emerge Stronger podcast. I am here with my co-host, Jay. Welcome back.
Hello, hey, good to be back.
So we had a lot of people reach out and say you guys should do more podcasting together. So it just worked out, and here we are.
Here we are.
A little bit of a different setup. They're trying a new format, so we're in the comfort of our home, and yeah.
Yes, we might have a dog jump in. Who knows?
Melody is out this week. She's doing some very important business with It's Not Over, which we love, and we thank her for that. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So we're going to talk about staying versus reviving. And I want to talk about staying, where a lot of people are like, I stayed in the marriage for the kids, but they find themselves in a very empty, lonely, quiet marriage.
Right.
And there may not be a lot of fighting going on. It's just a very empty and lonely marriage. And they stay there because it's the right thing to do for the kids. We're also going to talk a little bit about, if you're open to it, just a little bit about our story. And one of us, myself, was the one that wanted out of the marriage. You wanted to stay. And so I would love to hear from you why it was important for you to stand for our marriage.
Yeah. So I guess first thing that I would start off with is not everybody's situation is the same, obviously. And a lot of times there are going to be scenarios whether it's the man or the woman that is the one not standing for the marriage and they want out. And there's no change that the other party is going to be able to make to sway that decision. And you and I, we had a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But back to your question. Why did I want to stand for the marriage, number one? And why did I choose to stay whenever you wanted out really bad? And did I use the I'm going to stay for the children reason? And the answer to that is, yeah, I initially went into it saying that I was going to stay for the children. And there's many different ways to look at it. My reason for it is our girls were fairly young at the time. And I didn't want, honestly, another man to be in a position to raise my children. I just didn't. I'm a processor. I thought about a lot of different scenarios in which, for instance, we have two girls. There's going to be dances. There's going to be events like that I didn't want to miss out on. And I thought about situations where, gosh, my daughter's going to be out to dinner with my ex-wife and potentially her new husband. And I didn't like all of that. And it was one of those things where whenever it kind of got real, whenever you left, and we had our period of time where we didn't talk at all, but I was still right there, kind of waiting in the background. Honestly, I was waiting for divorce papers, as you know now.
Yeah.
And whenever we actually got to the point where we were going to start coming back, that was kind of in a time period where I had to make that decision because we had enough time that had went by that I had already started to mentally kind of move on. But then whenever you started to make that turn back, I was equally confused then as I was whenever we were leading up to the days of you leaving. But then at that point in time, whenever I saw that, hey, this is actually possibly has a chance to work out, she seems that she wants to come back, I was in a different place. But at the same time, I wanted my family back. I didn't want to have my girls being in those situations that I was going to miss out on, because I wasn't naive to the fact that, hey, whenever people marry or people get divorced and you start to live your life, I start to live my life. The one unfortunate part is things start to veer off. So my point in it all is it could drift off. I didn't want any of that. And so that's where I made the decision that I was going to go all in and fight for my children. That was going to be what I was going to chase. And if you and me came back together as a result of that, then it's a win-win all the way around. Some might look at that and say, gosh, why? So you're using your children as the reason. So are you hiding behind them? I wasn't hiding behind my children. I was looking at that as saying, me and you are going to go fight for our children in order for us to come back, and we're going to show them that we're willing to do the hard things that they may not know then, but they will know one day.
Yeah, that's good. And I feel like I want to point out that there's a difference between standing for your marriage
Mhm.
and fighting for your marriage and doing it for the kids. But there's also something that has to go along with that. You can't just stay the same person. You can't just say you're going to stand and stay and fight for the marriage without changing. You have to change. I have to change. And in order for the marriage to revive, something different has to happen.
Absolutely. I know whenever we were coming back together and I made that decision that, hey, I want to be in this marriage. That was first and foremost. I had to make a decision to say, I want to be with this woman. I want my marriage back. I'm doing it first and foremost for my children, but that's what I'm fighting for. And if we can make it work out, great. That doesn't mean that during that time period that I wasn't in this kind of rebirth of what we talk about to where I was changing a lot. And I think that whenever we first came back together, I had changed so much that you didn't really know this person, even though that we had been together for
Yeah,
we'd been married, what, 14
14
years?
years.
And so whenever we came back together, you had to relearn me, I had to relearn you. And I think that's where it starts to get real interesting because to your question, yeah, I'm not staying, I didn't stay the same person that I was.
Mm.
And you had a lot of changes as well too. So certainly you don't just go back into a relationship thinking that, oh, we're going to go back and just be the same two people that we were. There's been a lot that's happened. And I think both parties need to be aware of that. And like I mentioned in our last conversation, I had to go back and we had to go back and we had to learn to be students of one another.
Yeah. And I remember feeling as though, okay, we get another chance, we get a do over. And this next time around, we have to model what a good and healthy relationship looks
Mhm.
like for our children.
Yeah.
And they were 10 and 12 at the time. And so they were still fairly young, but very impressionable. And it was so important. And I think for both of us that we had to do it right the second time around.
Yeah.
And we've worked very hard at it. And here we are.
Yeah. So one thing that I would just say is we had to do a lot of things right, but we did a lot of things wrong.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the one of the lessons learned that you and I had is whenever we were in the thick of it, because I think leading up to these scenarios where an event happens, she tells me that she's leaving, that immediate shock, or he says that he's leaving, he's having an affair, whatever it might be. You get to that place to where you're not your best. And for me and you, whenever we were going through all of that stuff initially, and it was certainly more me, I was the one wanted to have the conversations all the time, wasn't that thoughtful of our girls being pretty close in proximity. But whenever we came back together, my point in all of this is whenever we came back together, that was one of our lessons learned that we took into it of being better because we were a lot more intentional about, hey, we don't want to risk having this kind of conversation if the girls are going to be around. That's a respect thing to the girls. And also it's a respect thing to me and you. So I would just say if you're going through this situation, whether it is leading up to it or you're coming out of a separation and coming back together, be very thoughtful on what you're talking about, where you're talking about certain topics, especially whenever the children might be close by. Because as we know, and we learned through the process, the kids are generally listening.
They are. They're listening. You don't think they're listening.
Correct.
And they're finding ways to listen. They're a lot smarter than
Yeah.
we give them credit for.
100%.
Yeah. So let's talk about, let's say that we have a scenario, not you and I, but just for the audience, that there's somebody that is staying in the marriage. They feel like God is telling them to stay in the marriage. They also feel as though they're doing it for their kids. But they feel like they're in a very empty marriage. They're
Mhm.
very lonely. They're both saying, no, divorce isn't an option, but we're just going to live like roommates. They're basically just existing in the marriage. What would you say to that?
It's a tough one because when you feel empty, a lot of times you feel empty. You don't feel like you have a purpose. Everything is just very dark. And a lot of times in those situations, what I find anyway, is you have a tendency to always be focusing on the negative because it's really easy. And it's really difficult to focus on the positive things. So, what would I say to that? I would say, I think that you have to have something that motivates you. What I often will say is, what was some hobby that you really enjoyed that you maybe haven't done in the last 5 years? Where are some of those things that you can kind of pick up a little bit of a passion and chase that again? Find something that used to bring you a little bit of happiness. And I understand that there's a difference between happiness and joy, and I get that. But find something that's going to give you that spark.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel as though spirituality plays a really big part in that. And again, I'll go back to us. It wasn't until I got really deep into my spiritual life that things really started to transform and
Mhm.
change for me.
Mhm.
And that was being really intentional about my relationship with God. And I feel as though, like, when you're lonely and you feel lost, you always have the Lord's always there.
Yeah.
And he will always be there. And so,
Yeah.
again, going back to the spirituality piece, you have to get in alignment with certain areas of your life. And going
Mhm.
back to what you said about this hobby, I'll throw our specifics out there. It's just about alignment in all aspects of your life, spiritually, physically, emotionally, intellectually, with your career, with your communication, your identity, your
Mhm.
social life, all of the things. It's important to be in alignment with that. And so, again, for the listener that's sitting there saying, I'm just existing in my marriage,
Yeah.
that's where my encouragement would be. You've got to focus on the other areas of your life. You've got to get in alignment with those.
Yeah, and there's many different things obviously that a person can do. I think you got to find that one or two things. For us, the spiritual part was a very big component of it. And the one thing that I would say is I think that whenever you're kind of in the thick of it, a lot of times people are looking for what I would call kind of that feeling. So sometimes they go after the spiritual part and they think, "Oh, I'm going to go pray and this is going to give me my result that I'm chasing," because I keep hearing people tell me that I need to go lean into God more, lean into God. But I think that this is also the part where God also convicts you in that moment too, because a lot of times people will go in there and they'll start praying and they don't see those answers immediately. So then what happens? They get aggravated at God and then they say, "Oh, he's not listening to me. He's not answering my prayers." And a lot of times you have a lot of learning in that process. The one thing that I always share, during that time is my morning routine was highly important to me. And I would always say start simple. Start simple, get up as early as you can. In the first 30 minutes of your day, make it productive, make it meaningful. For me, as I would get up, first thing I would do is I would take a quick shower. I would go straight to doing meditation, just kind of calming the mind, getting the mind there. I would get into prayer and then I would pray for 10 to 15 minutes. I would get into a little bit of the word and then I would do some stretching. And that was what my morning routine was because it not only grounded me, but it also got me in the word, got me saying prayers, having that relationship, talking to God. And nothing was immediately fixed, right? Whenever I went through that, but at least it started getting my relationship with the Lord much deeper. And quite honestly, for me, whenever I went through that process, I learned a lot about myself that I didn't realize
Yeah.
that I was going to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that I'll say is I was talking to a client earlier today, and I think that some of these clients, they get to a point, and maybe you and I were there at that point at one point as well, is I'm praying, I'm asking, it's not working. I'm reading the books, I'm listening to the podcasts, I'm going to church, I'm doing all of these things and nothing's changing. I'm talking to my spouse, I'm telling them how I feel, like all the things. And one of the things that my client and I talked about today was, I understand that you're doing all of these things. However, Are you leaving room for God to do what God needs to do?
Mhm.
And sometimes you need to get out of God's way so he can do. And that just means you stepping back and recognizing that you can only control what you can control.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of personality types. And I remember this with many clients. They would say, Sonia, just tell me what to do. I need you to tell me what to do. And they really did need some sort of process to take. Okay. And if going back to, which was very on point, is okay, you're going to start small. This is what I want you to do. You're going to get up and you're going to pray. You're going to get up and you're going to go work out. You're going to get up and you're going to have something so specific. And they're like, perfect, great, I'll do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that those kind of routines are good. And the other thing too is anybody that thinks that they're just going to jump into going through a difficult time of pain, loss, grief, all of those things, and that you haven't had that relationship with God in a long time, and you're going to dive in and just immediately start getting all of the answers that you're looking for. I think that person needs to spend a little bit more time with God to understand. But I think going back to standing, being in a miserable relationship, the one thing that I would encourage people to do is really start to understand what the Holy Spirit is trying to do within us. So that would be going into Galatians, but really understand what are we supposed to do in in our daily walk. Just look at the fruit of the Spirit. You're in this low point of your life. How can I show love? How can I bring peace? How can I be kind? And go to the last one. How can I have self-control in this situation whenever I am not in control of any of it? But you can find encouragement in that, in the word, but you have to allow yourself to let God work through you, work through the Spirit, and you can get so much motivation through that.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to bring it back to, we talked about this in our last episode, is just reconnecting. So again, talking about to the spouse that saying, I'm not leaving my marriage, but my marriage feels empty. It's lonely. So one of the things we talked about last week was just that reconnecting. We had our Thursday night sit down discussions and we were vulnerable. We were open. We listened. There were really deep, good discussions. And I think that's a good place to start. The other thing that I would say to that is going back to, you've got to focus on yourself. You've got to just dig deep and focus on yourself. And sometimes focusing on yourself isn't the self-care. It's really reflecting and being and holding yourself accountable. And it is, am I showing up well in my marriage? What am I doing? What am I doing wrong? I remember one thing that you used to say, and oh gosh, it used to irritate the living snot out of me. And it was more about parenting. And you would say, today we get an F in parenting. And oh gosh, I hated that because nobody wants to get an F. That's just failure, but it's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And when we're getting an F, that means I've got to look at myself. I can't just, oh, my kid's a little snot. I've got to say, okay, what is it that I'm contributing? What is it that I'm doing wrong? Same thing with your marriage. How would you grade yourself in your marriage? Would you give yourself an A in an episode? And this is, I actually stole this from you. So Melody and I talked about it, but it's when you used to say, would you want to be married to yourself? And it's such a good, honest question to ask yourself. 8, 9 years ago, would I want to be married to me? No. Now that I look back, absolutely not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of this focus on self. It gets a bad rap, especially in the Christian community.
Yeah.
But whenever I look at it and say, focus on self whenever you're going through these hard times, because if you look at it in a simple context, I can't be a good version of me for you, for my children, for my work, however you look at it, unless my version is good. So that's where I love the whole man in the mirror look at things. And because if I am not showing up the way that I want to show up, then who am I? Am I just going to be a talker of doing things that I say because it makes me sound good? Or am I going to be that person that actually follows through on those things? So the one thing that I would say is work on yourself. Absolutely. Does that mean that I'm going to go work on myself only and I'm going to ignore you? And the answer to
No,
that is no.
no.
Because the one thing I think we find a lot of people to where they think, oh, I'm going to go work on myself and I got to leave you alone because I can't come back for another at least 30 or 45 days until I go start figuring out some things of me before I can be my best version for you. And no, it's focus on yourself. Use that as a portion of what you're working on in total, and then focus on your relationship as well too. How much time are you going to give to, in this case, how much time am I going to give to my wife as I am working on myself?
Yeah. And that goes back to, and I said this last week, things really transformed for us when we both started serving each other. And a lot of times people will say, I'm not going to do that. He didn't do that for me, or he didn't do this, or he didn't do that. And you have to get out of that mindset.
Yeah.
Do it anyway.
Yes.
Serve your spouse.
Yeah. I think it goes back to the spiritual part. Just think about what is one of the biggest things that in your godly walk that you should be doing. You should be serving others. And one thing that I find a lot with couples is they do a really good job of serving everybody else except for their significant
Yeah.
other. And that's just one of those scenarios that people have to work through as part, because a lot of times whenever you get into those situations, as I say this, we don't want to serve each other because we're too focused on the sticky notes that we have written all over each other's face. Oh, she did this, she did that, she looks at me negatively, whatever the sticky notes are. And we get so focused on that we can't serve.
We can't see beyond it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to say, we'll wrap this up. I know that sometimes I can think of a particular client I'm trying, Sonia, I'm trying to revive my marriage, but he or she is not reciprocating. I would encourage you to keep going, keep praying, show up and serve even though you don't want to. Now, I will caveat and say that if you're in a abusive relationship, that's not what
Yeah.
we're talking about. We're talking about things that can be reconciled, a relationship that can be reconciled. So we're not talking about that.
Yeah. And I would just say if somebody is in that situation, it's not fun. It's one that you have to swallow some pretty big pills every single day. And those aren't fun to swallow. A lot of times you walk with your head down. I know for men, a lot of times whenever you're in that situation, it's one that you don't want to walk through the door. You don't want to be in that because it just sucks the life out of you, because oftentimes men are away from the home or they have a lot of stresses that are tied to financial related stuff, trying to be the good model for their family. Women have them too, but the biggest thing that I look back on is it was a season of our life. It was a season that we got through, and every single person, every single marriage out there is going to have storms in their life. And if two people found their way together to get married, and then got to that decision of I do, go fight for that person that you said I do to. And if you have children, some would look at this and say, oh, that's the wrong way to do it. But I can tell you just from my own perspective, you can reframe your mind and you can put a lot of fight into going after to fight for your children that is going to have a good outcome. And that forces you to kind of change your perspective as well too on things, because it starts to shift the focus away from, oh, it's all about you. And it's about, no, I'm fighting for this and I'm going to go work on myself. And in the process, we're working on each other and everything just kind of works out. But the big thing is don't get down on yourself in this process. Try to find something that is going to be a motivator for you, a healthy motivator, and always pour into God.
Yeah.
Always pour into God. Because at the end of whenever I look back on all of our stuff, that was the one thing, the absolute one thing. That was what they would call the superpower. And it was to really kind of hand everything over to God. And for me, as the man in the situation, I was a little bit of a control freak, obviously, as we went through our stuff, but I had to turn over all that control. And the one thing I would say also is it's one of the most rewarding things that I think I've ever been through, is just to kind of say, hey, I can't do it anymore, and hand it all over.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
be obedient and trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say to that too, that both parties, husband and wife, have to let go of pride and ego.
Yeah.
Because your pride and ego is getting in the way of reviving your marriage. And you do have to hand it all over to God.
Yeah. But it's worth it. It is definitely worth it to stick it out, because again, man, what a story. What a story for couples that go through the tough time. What a story to sit there and to be able to share with your children one day, to say, man, we went through some issues and we fought through it. And who knows, you might be sharing that story with your daughter or son one day that is going to get them through the dark time.
Yeah.
And it could be exactly the same. But how are you leading by example in that?
Yeah.
How did you lead by example?
And I can tell you right now, if you would have asked Jason and Sonia back in 2019 if we would be sitting here doing this,
Absolutely not.
I'd say
No.
absolutely not.
Absolutely
No
not.
way.
Yeah.
No way.
Absolutely not.
Okay, so if your marriage feels like it's running on empty and you want help reviving it, please reach out to us. You can email me at info@itsnotover.net. You can also go to our website, itsnotover.net, and you can find both of our bios there. We are so glad that you joined us today. Thank you so much, and hopefully you'll be back again.
Maybe.
I think you will be. All right.
All right.
Until next time.
All right.